All right, welcome back everyone to our penultimate session of the day. We're excited to have a team here. We have Martina Sneller, the Senior Vice President of Design for Hoffman and Associates, Adam McGraw, the Principal of Studio MB, and Kyle Nicholson, who's the Director of Pre-construction at John Moriarty and Associates of Virginia. And we're going to go ahead and explore strategies for risk mitigation and the future of the DC Energy Code. So team, I will turn it over to you.
Great, thank you for that. Hi, everyone. I'm Martina Schneller. As Katie said, I'm the Senior Vice President of Design for Hoffman and Associates, previously P. & Hoffman, if you don't recognize the name. We're a development company that really pushes design to create inspiring communities and places that we really want people to socialize, live, and work together. And I have asked these two gentlemen to join me today for our presentation, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves as well. Adam?
Thank you, Martina. My name is Adam McGraw. I'm a principal at Studio MB Architects. We're located in DuPont Circle, Washington, D.C. We've had the good fortune to collaborate with Hoffman Associates on several projects, including at the D.C. Wharf, and currently we're working together on a mixed-use project down in what's called Parcel B next to Audi Field.
Kyle?
Oh, Kyle, you're muted.
Of course, starting off on the right foot. Kyle Nicholson, Director of Pre-con for John Moriarty and Associates. And if anyone doesn't know us, we're a general contractor based in Boston, but have an office here. Our bread and butter is kind of private negotiated work where we can be actively involved in pre-con and add value to the process through pre-construction.
Great, thanks everybody. So to give you kind of a general overview of what we're going to try and tackle in the next 50 minutes, we're going to discuss risk and mitigating risk from each of our perspectives, the owner, the architect, and the contractor. And while you can assume that some risk would be in the development process, we are each going to talk about how advanced planning and a united team, including the owner and the architect and the contractor, can really get in front of some of these lessons learned that we're going to go through from previous projects, which led to meaningful design changes, which we can incorporate on projects moving forward to help us all mitigate risk from each of our perspectives. So I'm going to kick things off. And we will get the slideshow moving. So an overview we just went through. We're going to go through definitions of risk. So from the owner's perspective, there's plenty of risk to go around on projects. We face entitlements after we've procured the land, interest rates, construction costs, supply and demand, market downturns. I mean, the list goes on, but I think that the common thread is that I need to share my screen. Thank you, whoever put that in the chat. How about now?
Looks perfect, thank you.
Great. So let me get back on track here. So risk. Good developers learn to be risk conscious rather than risk adverse. And it is not, there we go. Which brings us to lot 31, which is the first project that I worked on when I came over to Hoffman and Associates. It was a public-private partnership with Montgomery County that was awarded to us in 2005 and went through design and looked a little bit different than what you know it as today, which ended up being the 1,200 space garage with the apartments and the condos. It was originally designed as a 250 unit condo building, which was going to serve as the gateway to Bethesda. This all sounds great. We thought we were on top of it. Flash forward to when our designs were ready and we were about to bid, and what should happen? But the 2008 recession. We thought that it was not a great time to move forward with that many condos onto the market in 2008. So the overall decision between our joint venture was to put the project on hold and completely redesign. As you can imagine, this is more time, more risk coming into it, but no one was comfortable bringing that many units to the market. So the big things that we looked at when we went back and revamped the project were getting rid of one of the condo buildings entirely, So we kept the Darcy, which turned into 88 condo units and made the flats 162 apartments. But that was the easy part of the redesign. There were also codes that were changing. Energy Star was coming online. Lighting design was changing. We spec'd lighting fixtures 6 times for this project. We thought that we were ahead of the game and had, gotten the right package together with our complex fluorescents. And we were joking earlier today, LED lights were just starting to become a thing. We stretched and scraped the budget just to get LED lights in the common spaces. So it's amazing how far the market has transitioned since that time. Other things that we had to work on were our envelope. We had to redo the blower door test and rerun energy models. You can see some pictures here of construction. It was a very large hole that was very close to the neighborhood. There were a lot of eyes on it. We ended up breaking ground in 2012. So it was a hurry up and wait situation to get the drawings pulled together. And so when we had our GMP, it didn't include 4 massive addendums that were to come later, which included new updates to codes, including NFPA 285. Now, NFPA 285 wasn't new on the code books. It was just starting to be enforced. It'd come to the forefront of everyone's mind. And so we went through a massive redesign on the exterior facade of this building to change the insulation from rigid to mineral wool, which changed the depth, changed our stud cavity and the thickness of the studs. And it was a pretty massive overall design change to the entire project. This is us mid-construction, just as we were getting our substantial completions. And you can see the marketing sign says dramatically different. And I thought that that was a nice note to this, because where the project started to 10 years later, when it actually came online, it was dramatically different in all things. So now that's my story from the development risk side. I'm going to turn it over to Adam so he can tell us a little bit about where the architect sees risk.
Thank you, Martina. So one of the biggest risks that designers can face is having to redesign projects due to changing regulations or misinterpretation of current regulations that one is unfamiliar with. Clients and owners are often reluctant to pay costly ad services related to code requirements, as they rely on us professionals to stay abreast of the latest rules. It's important to know what you don't know and get out and early on in the project and get out effectively in front of those unfamiliar issues and tackle them early on, so you mitigate, again, risk of redesign later on in the project, which can be costly and cost you time as well. So we're going to look at some case studies at the DC Wharf where we looked at mitigating environmental risk at both the Fish Market and Pier 4 projects. So next slide. So while Hoffman had been working for years down at the wharf on phase 1, all of their new buildings had been located with their ground floors above the 100-year floodplain. And so they thus far avoided for floodproofing design and the requirements for floodproofing barriers. When we began to design the Washington Fish Market and the Pier 4 projects, they were located on existing fixed sites that were within the 100-year floodplain, shown in blue here on this slide. So therefore, we knew we were going to have to familiarize ourselves with all the requirements of floodproofing regulations. So again, we got to understand NFIP, which is the National Flood Insurance Program. It's required for all buildings located within floodplains, which also led us to need to understand FEMA guidelines, which show you how to achieve floodproofing certificates, which are again required for buildings which are going to be located in these areas. We also had to get familiar with ASCE 24, which is the American Society of Civil Engineers, Chapter 24, which has design regulations and details for designing in these hazardous areas. And then all of these regulations in the city of Washington flow through the DC Department of Energy and Environment. So we met multiple times with DOEE to discuss our floodproofing designs and work with them to achieve approvable concepts. We also reached out to manufacturers of flood barriers. And over on the right, you can see the left-hand barrier is what's called Aquafence. and the right-hand barrier is what's called press ray. And these are some of the major certified flood-proofing barriers available on the market today. And we needed to understand how those barriers worked early on, as early as the concept and schematic design. So we knew how they were going to work with our buildings and how we were going to need to incorporate those into our details. During the course of the design of these two projects, DOEE issued a document called Climate Ready DC, which you can see highlights the dangers of rising tides and flooding to the Washington, DC area. I think everyone knows that over the past couple decades that more and more attention has been paid to these flood events, including the 2006 Federal Triangles, the interior flood of DC, the 2011 flood of the Georgetown Harbor, where they actually had flood-proofing gates but did not put them up, which was quite the debacle. And then also what the devastation that Hurricane Sandy brought to New York City, flooding the subway. Next slide. So these two projects would prevent unique, different flood-proofing challenges. The Washington Fish Market is located next to the water and on a large amount of fill. So it's subject to both lateral flood forces as well as moisture infiltration from below, whereas Pier 4 was projected out over top of the water and subject to lateral forces as well as hydrostatic pressure and uplift. Next slide. So again, at the earliest phases of design, we were working with DOEE and we were working with developing floodproofing strategies that were mixtures of both in blue floodproofing construction, which is, fully grouted masonry walls, structures that are impervious to water. And then in yellow, what we're showing are aquafence barriers, which are barriers which you can put up when you have storefront or glazing on buildings. So you don't actually, you can protect around window and door openings. And then in purple, what are called press ray fast logs, which are adhered directly to the building, which can also protect openings. Next slide. And here are our floodproofing plans that we worked on with DOEE for Pier 4. The above plan was one of our earlier drafts that we proposed with them. We had proposed what was called wet floodproofing, shown in light blue, which is allowing certain areas of the building to flood, while everything else was dry floodproofed, keeping the floodwaters out. At the end of the day, we went with all dry floodproofing to protect the entire building. DOEE felt like the cost of wet floodproofing, particularly the lobby, could lead to extensive repair costs. Again, we met with and worked with these vendors to, shows our press ray logs at the Washington Fish Market to see how these things were incorporated into the design so that we understood how to detail our buildings correctly. And here you can see the aquafence barriers erected around the oyster shed at the Washington Fish Market. So by the time we were engineering these systems and working with our structural, civil, and MEP engineers and developing our most expensive products, which were our permit and construction documents, we had floodproofing designs developed, which were both workable and understood by the regulatory agencies, and which ended up being approved and built without extensive permit comments or any costly redesign.
Great.
So again, how to mitigate risk through working with regulatory agencies early on in the design process.
Which leads us to our last leg of the stool, which is the contractor's risk. So I leave it to you, Kyle, to walk us through Story Park.
All right, so the first thing you'll probably notice is I won't have nearly as many visuals, which is probably not surprising from a general contractor, non-design professional. But for us, one of our biggest risks as a general contractor is getting the project started on time. There's a lot of risks once the project does start, but from a pre-construction standpoint, it's getting the project started for a lot of the reasons Martina talked about earlier: design issues, VE, permitting, code changes, financing. So for us, what's really important is to work collaboratively through pre-con to make sure jobs, not only start on time, but also happen. So a project I want to talk about is Story Park. This project has been around for a long time. I actually started working on it when I worked for a different general contractor in 2012 when it was a residential and office building. But the way it finally ended up was 500 residential units, 235 key Marriotts, 40,000 feet of retail, and about 275 spaces below grade. Also having the loading dock below grade, and then it's pushed up right against the tracks there for WMATA, CSX, and Amtrak. So really simple job. When we got involved at DD, we priced the drawings as they were. We were probably about $8 to $10 million over the target budget. So we sat down with the design team, and then we just started attacking kind of different portions of the project to start to figure out how we could get the cost down. And the first thing we did was related to MEP systems, one of your big costs. The project starting, design in early tens, water source heat pump was the predominant mechanical system back there. When we got involved, it was still kind of in the water source heat pump design, but as the energy code changed, the efficiencies in VRF became more and more common. We saw an opportunity to, at least for the hotel portion of it, flip the project to VRF. So we did a design assist bid. We competed it, asked for add alternates or deduct alternates for VRF. Ended up saving the project about $750,000, gave a better system. The unit layout on the hotel rooms was able to get better because they were able to use the ceiling mounted VRFs instead of a vertical water source heat pump. So overall saved costs, made the building better. And that's the kind of stuff that we push towards with pre-con, not just, hey, we can change the tile and save you a couple bucks, stuff that actually adds value, which is kind of ties into another thing. Even though we didn't change the water source heat pump on the residential, we still looked at kind of making it more efficient, combining the hot water system for, the hot water, the domestic hot water, and the hot water for the boilers for the water source heat pump. We were able to combine those, save cost. It's probably about $1 million with that and other kind of efficiencies on that. And we were also able to give them back space on the rooftop, which could potentially allow for more kind of penthouse occupied high-end roof space for the project. So the target, making the building better. Speaking of the penthouse, kind of brings up a couple other things. Again, project around for a long time, like Martina said, with lot 31, codes changed, and everyone knows in DC, stormwater green area ratio, that's something that's changed significantly. So kind of taking a design and then trying to add the additional requirements on top of it was resulting in some inefficient details, some cost-effective details, causing problems with elevator overruns, elevators fitting in the building. So we worked collaboratively with the design team, the owner, some of our subcontractor partners, and figured out solutions for all these, including doing a flat roof instead of sloped insulation, modifying the details so they were able to get all the warranties, both the waterproofing warranty and the thermal wind warranty, and then making it so their elevators could fit, and that the hotel, for example, would get the 9-foot cab that was required. We actually split the elevator package, one elevator manufacturer on the hotel side, one on the residential side, to get the best value for the project. So, just from a general contractor standpoint, that's kind of where our risk is and how we try to start to mitigate it through interactive pre-con.
Thanks for that. So that was where each of us come from the risk perspective. Now we're going to talk about how we have all joined up as a team for Parcel B to take what we have learned and use it to help us guide the project on a more straight line process. So each time Hoffman starts a project, we put out a list of our lessons learned to build upon them and to reduce our liability as the owners. So that means making good decisions on our side of the table, but also bringing in a team that ensures we avoid other issues that we haven't necessarily seen. Historically, VE has been one of the biggest issues and hurdles that we've been trying to overcome. And I was trying to explain it to someone the other day, it's like a bad diet. If I only eat donuts, I don't have enough time in the day to run on a treadmill to get myself back down to lose the weight that I want to lose on this diet. And that is how we've kind of come to appreciate VE in our office. Is typically there aren't enough easy elements that you can VE out of a job to get you back down to budget to make it work before you start getting into other items that open us up to exposures for delays, massive miscoordination efforts, and a compromised vision that you don't want the building to end up in. So Parcel B is the first one that we've really attacked. And while the architects and owners by themselves can be experts in their own rights, we wanted to make sure that we had a trusted GC engaged early on through the pre-con effort so that we could get early and often updates on pricing to understand where the market was driving and keep the design on a straight path instead of the tornado loop that we often find ourselves in as we go through the design process. Anecdotally, time comes back around as our big concern. So we are still focused on time as the common thread and the common risk. One of our other projects recently was going through a VE effort, and we delayed signing the GMP for 2 months. Now, historically, you wouldn't think that 2 months delay was going to cause a massive problem, but alternate subs from the ones that we were VEing saw an escalation of over $4 million in those 2 months that we delayed. So we were really shooting ourselves in the foot, looking to select some new light fixtures, which delayed other things, which caused ripple effects in the problems. So delaying decisions and escalation brings risk of time back into the picture. And if we can't plan a schedule out, both during design and construction, we're just opening the door and inviting more risk. And so with that, I turn it over to Kyle again, who has been a big help on our team in helping us mitigate risk and kind of updating our design process as we move through on Parcel B.
Yeah, so I'll start. There's someone in our office who has a term that I really like. He likes to say simple, not easy, right? The concept of this is relatively simple, right? Working collaboratively. That sounds really easy, like really basic, but it's not easy to execute, and it takes buy-in from kind of every leg of the stool, from the design team, the ownership, the general contractor, and the subcontractor partners, knowing that that what we do is going to turn out to be good. So from the beginning, like working collaboratively, you have to have communication. And one of the hardest things I learned in my early career is like you've got to be able to give bad news, right? You can't just tell the owner what they want to hear. Oh, sure, we're on budget, because then they'll make bad decisions because they think everything works out. So, for me, the worst thing that could be is like way over budget. For me, the second worst thing is we go to GMP and we're way under budget as well, because then the owner says, hey, I could have maybe had more upgrades if I would have known we were going to be under budget. So, for us, it's always constant, timely and accurate feedback. And with what's going on right now in the market, I think that's even more important, because sometimes stuff changes weekly and monthly and quarterly just with the commodity. So just being that interactive part of the team and always communicating sounds really simple, but it's hard to kind of follow through on. And that's one of our keys. The other thing is kind of focused early buyout of trades. The answer isn't just let's see if we can buy as many trades as possible before the GMP. The idea is to kind of look at the market holistically. What are the trends? Is now a good time to buy a certain trade? Is a certain trade booking up with their slots? So if we wait too long, we're going to get higher pricing because the sub's not going to have a ton of availability. So they'll say, well, I'll do the job, but I'm going to put a little extra margin on it because I'm already, I'm already filled up. So that's part of the selective and early buy. The other is to help the designer and the design team too. With Windows is a perfect example of one we like to do early a lot. If you go to Peerless or Oldcastle or Quest or the various kind of major high-end window wall manufacturers, they all have slightly different details. They all tie in with existing systems, with the brick or the metal panels or the precast. They all tie in slightly differently. So for us, we think what makes the most sense is to try to, as long as the market and the pricing makes sense, try to get that procured early. Then by the time we get to CDs, the designer is putting in the window system with their kind of standard details, and then everything else is coordinated. So when we go to buy out brick and metal panels and air barrier and the rest of the facade, there's a lot less gaps. I can't say we eliminate all the gaps, but there's less gaps in detailing between flashing and interaction with the other systems. The other one is elevators. I know if anyone here has read a qualifications list, you've probably read, elevator pricing is based on making certain modifications to the hoistway. It's another one we try to buy early. Those subs are sophisticated. There's not a lot of variability. Their elevators are what they are. You can do different cab finishes, different weights, but there's not a lot of variability. Their pricing is generally pretty stable. We can get them on board early, and then you don't have to redesign your shaft at, the IFC set, which seems like a minor thing, but 2 inches, 3 inches in one direction of that shaft can impact a unit or impact a mechanical closet or an electrical closet, and can have a ton of ripple effects. So we try to do that. And then that kind of ties into the last point, costly and time intensive VE exercises. As a contractor, we don't make any money by just doing pre-con for another extra 6 months while we try to VE the project. We are built to build projects, so we don't want to spend time doing that. So it's in our best interest to be proactive on this. For the owner, they are not going to get the value if we're VEing and trying to find too many alternates and save 3-5% at a GMP set. You're gonna that would have been 8% that you'd have to get out to save the 5%, versus if you did it early, you could have got the straight 5%. And then for the architects, we don't want them to have to redesign stuff. I talk to a lot of architects, and what we generally hear is it's not efficient work for them either to be redesigning stuff. It's hard to recover fees. So we want to be respectful of everyone in the process, because we want it to be collaborative. We want to work with the owner again. We want the architect, when they say, hey, who should I work with? We should work with JMA. And when it works kind of collaboratively, and then we build a team that works successful, and then we can kind of go project to project, and that's been really successful for us. So that's kind of how we are really trying to mitigate risk through pre-construction. Simple, not easy.
So we pulled maybe our top 3 examples. Some may be expected when we show them to you, and some maybe not so much, of areas where JMA really came in and pushed us on our decisions that we had made early on in concepting for Parcel B, to see some design changes and really ensure that we were headed down the right path of the original design, versus having to go back and look to change things. So as I flip this slide here, I'm going to turn it back over to Adam so that he can walk us through these examples directly from our project, which is currently in the DD phase. So you're getting to see things real time as we're going through and evaluating them.
As Kyle, as Kyle said, one of the things to nail down early that is very helpful is the windows, and not just the brand of window and the detail, because obviously at the earliest levels, you're not quite into the details yet, but percentage glazing and how much of the building, is going to have glass on it. And while it might, as architects and designers, feel a little like it's hemming you in early on to say, we want to hit these different targets, it's actually a very helpful tool in terms of prioritizing where you're putting glass in the design. And so what we were able to do for this project is develop a set of, A, B, and C facades, or sort of primary, secondary, and tertiary facades. And, focusing the most glass on our most visible parts of the design, and are sort of our best face forward. So those are our A facades, which you can see have the sort of tall, slender gangs of windows with the curved tops. And then we worked with our secondary facades, and again, our third facades, which were the interiors of courtyards and places that were far less visible. And so at the end of the day, we were able to achieve a design that was meeting those targets, which was going to get, again, keep it as designers, we always get disappointed when our brilliant and beautiful designs get value engineered. So we were able to, again, target the right percentages from the get-go, get designs that we were excited about, that the owner was excited about, that we developed with them, and through an entitlements process as well, were designs that were pleasing to the community, as well as the DC regulatory agencies. So it was a really helpful exercise. And again, we anticipate that, these glazing percentages now will not change as we move through the rest of the project, because we've started out in the right place. The other thing Kyle touched on was mechanical systems. So, while the VRF and water source heat pumps and those choices don't seem like they're going to be big design choices early on, we tackled them head on at our sort of concept and SD phases. Our earliest narratives from our MEP engineers did spec water source heat pumps. As Kyle was indicating, that was really the way the market was going, at the time that this project started. However, their experience at Story Park, led them to push us towards the VRF solutions. Again, VRF becoming, more energy efficient. So it wasn't a question of using something less efficient, but the big thing that we had to be wary of is if we were going to go with a VRF system and have, we did keep some water source heat pumps. You can see there's a small cooling tower on the far left. But we were going to have to deal with a lot more stormwater if we weren't using all water source heat pumps. So knowing that early on is really important, because as we get to our garage design, and here you can see this is a garage design that was early in schematic, we were able to plan for the greatly increased size cistern that was going to be needed to handle that stormwater. So, I mean, you can imagine, here we're showing a cistern that we were able to figure out how to fit it under the drive ramp down in the parking garage. But you can imagine trying to find a cistern this size during, the 50% CD phase, or even at the IFC. It would be a huge change, and the owner would be getting really frustrated with the amount of parking spaces we would probably lose and the amount of redesign down there. So making that decision at the earliest levels of design was really helpful. And again, helped us without having to redo all the, then stormwater regs are, complicated to redo, as they often get worked out earlier in the permitting process as well.
And then our final one, we debated whether or not to put this in, but I really pushed for it because of my lesson learned from lot 31, where we had to go back and change all of the metal stud sizing on the exterior facade. But we did talk early about demising partitions, as silly as that sounds, for both interior and on the facade. And Kyle, I'll let you talk a little bit more about that and the volatility of the market and how that's kind of playing into some of the decision making these days.
Yeah, this one might seem from left field. Well, it's not that important. And I see at least one other attendee who I know we've had this exact same conversation on a project that we're working on the GMP right now. But we try to get aligned on the partition types, both for the interior partitions and the exterior. And the reason that's important, one, for the exterior, a lot of that affects ultimately affects the energy model. So getting that right from the beginning works for us. But for us, what we saw, basically from, say, March 1st of last year to March 1st of this year, the drywall subcontractor pricing increased by about 35% plus or minus. And we really got into the weeds of what is driving that. And what we found was 85% of that increase was based on, perimeter framing, exterior, light gauge steel studs, and then the kind of interior, just typical everyday unit demising partition studs. So, doing the 3 5/8 or 4-inch versus a 6-inch stud, not only, it's not necessarily just an architectural and a energy model, it's also a cost concern. So we really push for that, and we can usually get it to engineer out, except for in some unique conditions. And then for the interior, we see a lot of people pushing kind of the double stud, right? 2 studs. It performs really well, right? It's awesome from a sound. It's great. It's easier for us in some ways because it gives us more space to put plumbing pipes and coordinate. But we really kind of push just making life harder on ourselves sometimes for a single stud, doing the 4-inch stud or the 3 5/8 inch typically, and then going to the 6-inch stud where you have a plumbing wall for the same reason. One, you can save money right now. And two, it gives you a little bit more space in the unit. As the units get kind of smaller and tighter, adding an extra couple inches on the stud can affect ADA clearances. And, it seems kind of silly sometimes to push stuff like this early, but, getting on the same page kind of prevents a lot of ripple effects and redesigns of units and clearances and bathrooms and ADA at the kitchen. So, we just try to take all these lessons learned and things that people aren't thinking about and say, hey, wait, let's be smart about this. And maybe the partition we like isn't the one you end up using, but at least we have the conversation early, and then we're kind of unified as a team to avoid the issue down the road. And we've already had the conversation.
Yeah, and as designers, it's great to have this kind of feedback early, because you can bake it into your building and your design, and again avoid just that ripple effect later on of having to change the ADA clearances and unit layouts over hundreds of units for 12 stories tall. And then particular when you're looking at the exterior envelope, if you changed from 6-inch studs to 3 5/8, again, to try and achieve value at the sort of the GMP level, you've got to rerun your energy models. You've got to redo a lot of stuff, which, takes time and costs money and starts to eat away at the savings you're trying to achieve. So, when JMA brings these ideas to the table early, it's really helpful to, have them to work with and, again, build those in at earlier levels of design.
And it's not to say that we don't have a hard conversation about it, because I, for one, am a big proponent of the double stud on interior walls. So it took a lot of convincing and conversation to go back and forth, but it just shows how collaborative our team has been really on, a biweekly basis as we're going back and forth on these things. So it's been a really great experience. Okay, so we're moving into the last phase of the presentation now, where we're going to talk about future risk mitigation. And we don't have a crystal ball, but where DC Energy Code could move to, net zero, LEED Platinum. I spoke a little bit earlier about how we had to redesign Lot 31. Our LEED certification completely changed in that when we jumped models. I think there's going to be a lot of that coming in the future. And then just resiliency and climate change and how that all factors into design. So Kyle, if you could kick us off by looking into your crystal ball to give us what you think is coming down the line for DC's energy code and construction changes.
Yeah, so this is an extremely relevant topic, and I feel like I've just in the last probably 2 months, or really since the beginning of the year, we've really started talking about the DC Energy Code and the future of energy code with the designers and our developer partners. And the thing is really the BEPS program, and what are the requirements going to be on the next cycle as far as energy performance, and then what are the penalties are going to be. And we wouldn't claim to be experts on that, but we talk with our consultants, sustainability consultants, design partners, and the answer right now seems to be no one knows. That standard of what it's going to be hasn't been published, because they're going to rerun kind of based on the average buildings and then spit out a new number. But talking to some of our consultants, what they're saying is potentially a building that we build today that's LEED Platinum may not meet the minimum requirements potentially for the next cycle of the BEPS program. So for us in working with our clients, we're trying to figure out, okay, what are the design decisions we can make? What can we do to future-proof? What are these decision points to make things happen? And I wouldn't sit here and say we have all the answers, but we can at least have a conversation about it. One of the ones we talk about a lot recently is the vertical venting of the building, and it gets pushed a lot. Like, hey, that's going to make your building more energy efficient, which it does, but there's also ripple effects of that. MEP coordination becomes harder. You have to have more height on your top floor of the building, which potentially reduces the ceiling height on your typical floor, because DC is so tight on the height code. So, maybe not knowing the answer yet, but we're having those conversations and being able to to be part of the team and have those conversations and kind of show, hey, here's the cost if you do that, versus the energy model saying, here's the potential benefit on energy performance. Being able to have those is how we're going to continue to kind of move forward as an industry, is being able to weigh the cost versus the design versus the performance versus the code, and make sure we make smart decisions to have buildings that meet these requirements, but also that people like Martina can afford to build.
So for me, when we start thinking about this graphic, it's silly, but it gets us thinking in the right headspace. Our built environment has moved so far away from nature. We need to start thinking about how we can start to blend the two together instead of having two very distinct models that we look at, the forest and the built environment. And so we see lots of graphics, right? The road to net zero carbon buildings. It's super easy. We reduce our carbon, increase energy efficiency, have more renewable energy, and then get some offsets at the end of the day, and everything's great. But I don't know that we have all of the answers just yet. In fact, I know we don't, but I can say that we are attempting to do a lot of these things in our buildings in incremental steps. For example, renewable energy. DC has taken a big push in renewable energy recently, and Hoffman has gotten pretty creative with how we're including photovoltaics on the roof. So historically, we would have just elevated them and put them over our green roof, which may have decreased our stormwater credits. But because stormwater has become more tight, we're experimenting with different heights, different angles. Our most recent projects has started incorporating photovoltaics into the mechanical screen walls. So since we're screening the mechanical spaces anyways, we might as well have the panels do double duty. So we're really trying to get creative with additional square footage and new and exciting ways to bend the technology and have it work for us in multiple ways, such that Kyle mentioned, we want to include these things, but we are still looking to make money at the end of the day. So we need to be cost conscious about how and where we're including the new technologies. I mentioned the Energy Star changes that we went through at the Darcy, and I thought that this was an interesting statistic. The EPA runs the top city list where Energy Star certified buildings are most prevalent, and DC is number 2 on the list, only surpassed by Los Angeles. So I think that DC has done a good job of staying competitive, but it's certainly something else that we need to keep pushing, given the fact that in 2008 was when most of the campaign for consumers of Energy Star products were really starting to hit the market. We've seen exponential growth, and hopefully we'll see that continue to trend. The 3 technologies that drive transformation, right? Like buildings and commercial real estate in general is at the center of it, because we need to harness the power of renewable energy and also modifications to our transportation system, and how those all come together and form buildings that people want to be in, that have control over lighting, HVAC, the new BMS systems where at the touch of a button you can check on your occupants in any of the residential units or on your office floors. I think that we're going to start to see a lot more money and technology delved into this area. You can see at the bottom of the screen here that the estimate from JLL's research group is they think that $5.2 trillion of transition cost is going to go into existing infrastructure alone in the next 10 years to really start to upgrade existing buildings to make sure that they're keeping pace with the updated energy models and all of the other advancements that are starting to occur. And then that brings us to, we're talking about the net zero carbon and the communities and the resources that we can use, but how does that tie into the human performance and the social values of it as well? Historically, risk and resilience wasn't really at the forefront of design or engineering. And it's an interesting statistic here now that 83% of occupiers and 78% of investors believe that climate risk is a financial risk. And so I don't know about all of you folks, but we're definitely starting to get more questions about ESG and how our company is updating and modifying from not only our end users, but also our financial investors. Everyone is starting to align on the common path of how we can move forward in creative ways that will help reduce carbon footprints and increase efficiency to meet all of the new guidelines that are coming out, as well as risk and resiliency from climate everything, which I think Adam might have a few words to speak about, given that he is our resident expert on the rising waters of DC.
Well, just given our experience at the wharf, and again looking around the city, and with emphasis on biophilic design and people wanting to live near natural views and waterfront, and that's a trend nationwide. That we've been focusing on energy design, but the regulations around resilient design are hand in hand. And I think Martina may have touched on earlier also resilience in terms of thinking about the kinds of design coming out of 2.5 years of pandemic, and what our office space is going to look like, and designers being aware of and pushing changes to natural ventilation and other potential design updates. So again, risk and resilience is, as I said, I think sort of hand in hand with energy, the changing and improving energy codes as well.
Yeah, it's certainly not going to get easier moving forward. That's the general outcome that we've all come to here. So I think that's the end of our slide deck today. We're happy to answer any questions if there are any. I'm going to